Hello and welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be discussing the new super duper release of Pink Floyd live at Pompeii. Not that I know that much about it, in fact I know very little about it, but I'm a huge fan of the original. In fact, it's my favourite thing that Pink Floyd has ever done was Pink Floyd at Pompeii after I saw it as a very young man. But somebody who does know about it is Mr. Tim Bowness. Tim, welcome to the channel again. Are you okay?
I'm all right, yeah. So I'm your expert correspondent on this then, yeah?
You are, yes, you're going to lead this one. I actually know quite a lot
Yeah.
of facts about this because I'm not a huge Pink Floyd fan, but I am
Right.
a I'm a huge fan of Pink Floyd live at Pompeii.
Okay.
And the fact that they've now brought this out with a proper album all remastered, and they've remastered the film, because I think if I was going to say what my favourite Pink Floyd album would be,
Yep.
it would be the album that goes with Pink Floyd at Pompeii, which
Which
is
has
now a
just been
proper album.
released. Yeah, you can see.
Yep. Lovely, yes.
Very, very good. Mixed by Stephen Wilson. I believe it's exclusively available from burningshed.com.
Yeah, so if you want to pick up a copy of this or the DVD, then you can go and get it from burningshed.com.
Yeah, exclusive, obviously.
Yeah, I don't think you can get it anywhere else,
Yeah,
can you?
not at all. Amazon doesn't exist. See, I thought we were doing Frankie Howard's Up Pompeii. That's obviously what I'd studied, but okay, I can do this as well.
Can you change stream at this point?
I can. Although talking of Frankie Howard, I was weirdly enough, I was in the beautiful Canberra Sands the other week, and it was where Carry On Follow That Camel was filmed. And so I was walking in the footsteps of Kenneth Williams and Phil Silvers, and
But not Frankie Howard, though.
not Frankie
Frankie
Howard.
Howard, no.
Or Sid James, sadly.
But Frankie Howard, he was the lead in the awful film version of Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
I have never seen it.
I watched bits and bobs for it just for this channel as research. But
Okay.
if I had my wherewithal with me, which I haven't, I would probably have to be able to move from Frankie Howard via that film into some sort of link with Pink Floyd. But as I scramble for the bands that appeared on it, and at the moment I've got Aerosmith, the Bee
Yeah.
Gees, and uh, who else? Earth, Wind and Fire.
Okay.
Now, Earth, Wind and Fire did do a very good version of "Got to Get You Into My Life," which was recorded at Abbey Road, which, of course, is the studio where Pink Floyd recorded their first album back in 1966, at the same time as they were recording Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. So my wherewithal has returned, and I've been able to
Yeah.
connect those two things, Frankie Howard,
Yeah.
quite quickly to Pink Floyd.
Well done. Well, and then obviously, Floyd were huge fans of the Beatles, and the Beatles were huge fans of Floyd, particularly Paul McCartney, I think, was obsessed with them. So was Pete Townsend. I mean,
Mm.
he was obsessed with Floyd in the early days. And it's one of those things where you actually think if you could go back and time travel, which gigs would you go and see? And I've always kind of fancied that Pink Floyd at the UFO Club.
Mm.
But also, I think you're right that when Pink Floyd took on that kind of psychedelic improv experiment post Sid Barrett, might have even been better. The stuff that's on Pompeii and the stuff that's on Source Full of Secrets and Atom Heart Mothers, some extraordinary music. But yeah, going back to the Beatles, one interesting thing I always find is they're so effortlessly brilliant. Whenever you hear a cover version, you realize how effortlessly brilliant they are. Because I think on one of those films, there's Peter Gabriel doing Strawberry Fields Forever. And of course, he's got one of the world's greatest voices. Yet he oversins Strawberry Fields. You realize how natural Lennon is. And similarly, I think Guy Garvey did a version of Golden Slumbers, and it just seemed like the Boston Symphony Pops Orchestra or something. It was too much because you realize that McCartney navigates this really difficult rhythm with no effort at all. They were very gifted. It's one of those bands I think that the more you look into them, the more you kind of appreciate the quality in those original Beatles recordings.
I think so. And I think the Beatles occupy a space in that they're not just a huge rock band, they actually have cultural significance. And
Yeah.
Pink Floyd are almost like the opposite, that they're absolutely huge bands, but their cultural significance, which exists, but it's so much more ephemeral. Now, what I've always found interesting with Pink Floyd is when they went in to record their debut album, the record labels had signed them up and stuck them in Abbey Road, I imagine, because they could see them almost as the next stage of the Beatles, but with such a charismatic frontman, with those songs, those quirky, weird Sid Barrett songs, and his pop star good looks. That was all there, and then within a year, that had gone, and this band started to scramble to find some meaning. They've not even got a frontman or a songwriter. Dave Gilmour comes in, and Gilmour and Roger Waters start on this negotiation, which seems to slowly pull the band apart. But there is a Goldilocks period, isn't there, where
Yeah.
which builds up to Dark Side of the Moon. But what I've always felt is that amongst all those albums that went before, I've always found them very, very patchy. But the
Mhm.
good stuff is incredible because they're trying to find different things and different ways of going. And I think Echoes is where they really find it. And
Yeah.
then they're caught off guard with this film, which was originally for television, wasn't it? They didn't even really think about it. It was just going to be filmed for television. And the guy that was putting it together had high production values and a vision, but it wasn't their vision as such, was it?
No, I got the impression that they didn't want to do this because they saw it as the tail end of what they've been doing. So, I mean, this is a great film in the sense that it's capturing a band at a transitional point. And you're right. It's like Barrett leaves, they scramble for direction. I've got to say, I love all those albums. Some of them are patchy, but I love all of those in between Piper and Dark Side albums. There's always something that's fascinating. And actually, lest we forget, they were huge. Sourceful. Atom Heart Mother, these were chart albums. Atom Heart Mother was number one, but what they were was a huge underground band. They were getting number one
Yeah, that's
albums.
what, yeah.
Maybe they were getting to number one, then they were out 2 or 3 weeks after that. And this album, in a way, it's like the last hurrah of the psychedelic searching Pink Floyd. And as I say, I always got this impression that they thought at this stage, 72, when I think it was recorded, they were still being seen as this space rock band, this, if you like, the dying embers of the psychedelic revolution. But I think it's brilliant. Yeah, musically, it's them doing this material, all of it from, Saucerful to Echoes. It fits post Piper. And I think that if you were watching the documentary, Have You Got It Yet? The Sid Barrett story, and then this, you're telling that story up to Dark Side. And of course, in the version of this film that I've seen, you've got the Abbey Road snippets of them recording
Mm,
solos from Dark Side of the Moon, which I think is wonderful. Rick Wright playing piano lines for Us and Them, and Dave Gilmour playing the solo for Eclipse. Amazing stuff. And so I think it's quite magical. I know a lot of people think it's sacrilege inserting that into this film, but it's the only version of the film I've ever known. Although this could be false memory because I first saw it early 80s, I think, on TV, BBC Two is my guess. And in my mind, it's always had those Abbey Road sections. And seeing it in the cinema, it's an altogether different experience. So I've seen it on TV on a really crappy black and white mini screen, and it was still captivating. Maybe because I'm such a fan of the band, I was clinging on to every note and every image. Then I saw it years later on DVD, clearly slightly improved quality and a bigger, better color television. But seeing it on the cinema screen brought a new life to it. It wasn't quite like being in a concert auditorium, but it was phenomenally atmospheric. The huge screen, the music surrounding you. It was a very immersive experience. And I guess I fell in love with it again. I mean, I've always loved it. I mean, I'm personally, when I got into Floyd mid 70s when I was about 11. And it was because a friend's dad had lots of cassettes of things like Tangerine Dream, Mike Oldfield, Pink Floyd. And we used to play it in the background of our Sabutio games. So, flicking West Bromwich Albion away kit to the sound of Atom Heart Mother. And I remember even at the time being transported by the music and then looking at the covers. And even on cassette, these covers had a real sense of enigma. There was something beyond just the musical notes. And one of the first albums I managed to afford with my pocket money, and this would be after, admittedly, some 10cc Beatles and ABBA albums, was Pink Floyd Wish You Were Here. And I'd saved up for it. So I got into them in a really haphazard way as you do when you're that age, because you're not reading the music papers, you're relying on what you see around you. And I'd only sort of heard Atom Hot Mother and Wish You Were Here, loved them both. And the first two albums I ever got by them were Wish You Were Here, and then I got Relics because it was cheap.
Mm.
And I didn't get Animals when it came out because I couldn't afford it. And then I got The Wall as a Christmas present when that came out. And so I was kind of discovering them in quite an odd way. And then this came on the television, as I said, probably early 80s BBC. And there was, just such a quality surrounding the band. They almost had something. I always think that Pink Floyd, Massive Attack, maybe there are a couple of other bands in this who, for whatever reason, seem to represent more than just the notes. There's something in the stage performance, the artwork, and the perfect simplicity sometimes of the music that seems to have a meaning that goes beyond just being a band and a record that you put on. So yeah, when I first saw it, I loved it. I was kind of blown away by it, but seeing it in the cinema again with enhanced sound, enhanced visuals, it once more became this immersive experience, which maybe took you back to Floyd playing live in 68, 69, 70,
Mhm.
Yumma Gumma period.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That is the fact that we're trying to piece together when we first saw it, because usually with albums it's not like that, But I think for many people this was shown on the television. Many people grew up. I saw it very early on, but I have to reverse back up to the mid 70s because I can remember in the mid 70s we'd get wheeled into in the morning to watch the school programs. Now, anyone of a certain age would mean that the teacher would wheel in a television on this sort of stretcher,
Yeah, I remember.
right? There was no video, VHS video recorder. It was just the television, and you'd have to sit there, and then you would watch stuff that was actually being transmitted by the
Yeah.
BBC. And there was a science program on there, and I can't remember what it's called. I'm sure people in the comments will be able to remind us of this. But the theme of it was one of the tracks off Dark Side of the Moon. In fact, the one that goes, doo, 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 doo. It sounds like a science laboratory. And I used to love this music as a child. That was the first time I heard Pink Floyd. And then throughout the 70s, the BBC, I would say late 70s, started to run Crystal Voyager on a Sunday afternoon, which was this surfing movie, a documentary that covered this guy going out. But towards the end of that film, there was a long extended section where there was lots of underwater shots and going through waves, all to the soundtrack of Echoes. And I fell in love with Echoes.
Yeah.
I just thought it was incredible. And it was an edited version as well. Then later on, we see it on the television, and I had a videotape of Crystal Voyager and Live at Pompeii, which I'm struggling to say because I keep wanting to say up Pompeii because of your introduction. But and I watched this over and over again, and again there was this sort of cut down version of Echoes that was incredible. Then I bought Dark Side of the Moon, and that didn't impress me that much. I then heard Echoes, and I'd actually stopped. Otherwise, I'm not really that into Pink Floyd now. For me, it was all that early stuff early on, and I've always felt that their high points. I mean, when you look at the lineage of the band, they're building up to Echoes, aren't they? All the time. That's like they've really nailed it at that point. I think Atom Heart Mother, the track Atom Heart, is incredible, but it's so strange. I mean, for that album to chart with a sideline track of that sort of
I love
abstract
it. I know
rock.
the band hates it, but I adore that. And what amazing arrangements by Ron Geesin as well. It's not
Yeah,
just the band.
yeah. It's one of those early experiments of band and orchestra, which is entirely successful
Mm.
because of the way they then blend it with the studio. So there's some incredible stuff there. I think by the time I got to Dark Side of the Moon, the Reputation had come before it, and I knew who Pink Floyd was because I'd got I think I got a videotape of Pink Floyd at Pompei, and nothing ever surpassed that. So it's very strange it's taken this long time to get a polish, which it now has. And
Yeah.
now we have an album, and now we have the film, and I think it's an incredible thing. Now, I don't remember in the copy that I had as a youngster having the Abbey Road footage in, but when I bought it on, I think I bought it on VHS, probably late 80s, early 90s, and that Abbey Road stuff appeared, and I went, oh, I've never seen this before.
Mm.
And I actually think the BBC TV one that I'd recorded was also edited down as well.
Right.
But what I remember was, and you're so right, and I never thought about it before, is the Pompei footage really is a summation of the 1960s thing. It's very trippy. But when they inserted in the Abbey Road, that looks like now, doesn't it? It looks like a
Yeah.
trendy band now in the studio. Like it looks like Radiohead making a new album.
Well,
They're
they
so in
look
the future
so,
suddenly, aren't they?
and they look so cool. They did at that point. And Abbey Road hasn't changed much. I mean, I was lucky to do a session in Abbey Road, and it's one of because I've recorded in quite a few big studios. And this was the one studio where I thought, while I was singing, I thought, this is where Dark Side of the Moon was recorded. This is where Sergeant Pepper's was recorded. This is where OK Computer was recorded. There was a real sense of it. And I think it's got a sense of itself. And you're right that they could be back. I mean, they're in what? Their early 80s now? Late 70s,
Yeah.
but they are one of those. They're one of the few bands, I suppose. If we think about bands from the era and artists from the era who've survived, if you talk to the average 14-year-old, I was in Corsham the other day, and significantly, Corsham is where Nick Mason has got one of his piles, and he holds an annual festival there in which he earns money for charity. And when I was wandering through Corsham, walking the dog, there were three teenage boys and they were talking about Pink Floyd. And I don't know that they knew that Mason lives in Corsham, but it's bizarre thinking of these sort of 17-year-olds going, yeah, what is this feud between David Gilmour and Roger Waters? And how do you think they would have continued if Rick Wright hadn't left on the wall? And it was really odd, these detailed conversations with teenagers, that they are one of the few bands that teenagers still know will wear t-shirts. You've got maybe, I don't know, Joy Division, Nirvana, Pink Floyd, Elton John, Billy Joel, Fleetwood Mac, and in most cases, bands and artists that were quite unfashionable in our era when we were growing. Whereas a lot of artists who were huge, like Genesis, you probably won't find anyone under 55 who knows who they are, or artists that were incredibly fashionable, like Gang of Four or Cocteau Twins. I remember going to a Robin Guthrie concert, and it was beautiful. But what was interesting to me was that everyone was in a 2-year age range of me. And there are certain artists where it seems to be this is a generational moment. But Floyd, for whatever reason, you'll find 14-year-olds, 89-year-olds. Tom Stoppard still talks about Pink Floyd.
Mm.
Seem to have this amazing longevity and ability to appeal.
Yeah, I mean, I've quite sort of contentiously really poked a lot of derision at Pink Floyd on my channel because of feeling that they are so highly rated, and yet there's so few great albums there for me.
Yeah.
That like you said, those early albums are very interesting. Ummagumma is very interesting. When I was at art college, my best friend had Ummagumma, and he'd sit in his bedroom, listen to all this twanging going on, feeling very arty and sophisticated. Like a substitute for proper modern classical music. But for me, looking at it now, that they're directionless, so it takes them a while. And I think one of the things that's really interesting in Pink Floyd, this is my theory, if Syd Barrett hadn't have gone, they would have eventually churned out a few hit records that would have been very sort of strange, surreal stuff. And they would have probably, because they were so of the time,
Yeah.
they would have just gone from view. And we might not be talking about them if Syd Barrett had stayed around.
I think I think you're right. I mean, I think they were great in the sense that Syd Barrett, the early improvs, if you watch, they were doing similar style improvs
Yeah.
at the UFO Club and pre-Piper and post-Piper. So that element was in what they did. But I think as a kind of a songwriting band, I mean, I've always preferred, I mean, I really like Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And I think had they made just that one album, we'd still be talking about them as being one of the great psychedelic bands. But
Yeah, maybe.
I think you're right that I can't see how that would have evolved,
It wouldn't,
because
no. And so
yeah,
so they really struggle. They're good quality English gentlemen of a certain stock. They know how to do things properly. They're very organized. And so I feel that that enables them to then negotiate their way through, probably, going to their friends and saying, do you want to do a film soundtrack? We'll do that for you, which enables them to sort of keep going. It's all very clever, but they have a long period to basically for Roger Waters to turn into a visionary songwriter, because he's obviously not at the start, and for Dave Gilmour and Roger Waters' vocal styles to emerge, and for those to be so complementary. There's so much with Pink Floyd that they had to negotiate to get to that point. And I wonder, because of that, they didn't fall into all the traps that a lot of those bands that had emerged at that time did. And they were then having to think, by the time they got their act together, they were actually really chiming with the times at that point in 73.
Yeah, and I think again, this is why watching the New Vision, some people don't like the Abbey Road inserts, but I think they're essential because you have the summation of what possibly of the best of what Pink Floyd had done in the
That's
early
exactly
80s.
it. That's how I feel, yeah.
And then it's like, this is what's going to happen.
But yeah.
And my God, and at that point when they're filming it, they don't know that they're going to go from big underground band to one of the biggest bands in the universe with an album that is still in the charts
It's
globally,
incredible, yeah. It's
you know.
incredible. I was reading this morning as I was doing a bit of research, and you probably know this, but I didn't know this. Astronomy Domini on the first album, the actual psychedelic experimental thing that exists on the first album, is actually them jamming on the Steptoe theme. Down, 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 down.
Yeah.
And when I read that, I thought, even there, because you look at because I love Syd Barrett's songs on the first album. I love his own tunes like Octopus. I love Syd Barrett. That's the thing that gets taken away. But even when you look at the mad improvisational stuff, it's still got that English quirkiness to it. And there is a hook there, isn't there?
Yeah, and actually I think they said that Interstellar Overdrive was him playing a guitar line from Love's Forever Changes. That he was actually just kind of is
Yeah.
the riff from one of the songs there that then develops and develops and
Well, that
develops.
makes sense. Yes.
Which I think is interesting. You're right that, these sort of fleeting ideas become these monumental improvs. I mean, I really like in the early period, tracks like Cirrus Minor or If. They did these beautiful ballads. Because what is curious about this kind of in between Piper and Dark Side, they could have been any number of bands. And if you listen to things like If or Cirrus Minor, they could have been singer-songwriters in a kind of a Nick Drake style
Yeah.
with John Martin. You've got this bucolic, pastoral Britishness that I really like in those ballads.
But when I took my deeper dive, because I didn't know all the albums that well, when I decided to rank all the albums and went through, the one that had just sat there never getting my attention was Obscured by Clouds, which of course we're coming at right at this time.
Yeah.
And actually, I thought this is the underrated album. I think when I did my ranking, I might not have thought that, but then I went back to it over and over again, and there's a quietness, and it's almost like the opposite of Dark Side, but they have escaped all this. We don't quite know what we're doing because it's a very songwriter type album, isn't it? Very
Yeah.
atmospheric, but very miniature in a way. Very,
For them, it's very revealing because it was really quickly recorded, which they never did. Well, probably did with the improvs, of course, but it was very quickly recorded, unlike Dark Side. So it's kind of capturing them at a moment, and really is just like that kind of lightning in a bottle. I mean, funny enough, that's the one album I know the least. I mean, I've known the Pink Floyd albums, almost all of them, for decades and loved most of them. And that's the one that I've rarely played in its entirety, so I can't speak about
really,
it.
I thought you being such a Floyd fan that you'd be able to go into depth with all these
No,
albums.
Stephen really likes it. Stephen Wilson, who, obviously mixed this, which is exclusively available from burningshed.com. He loves it. And I know a lot
At
of
no
people.
point talk to him. He's going to be biased, isn't he? If he mixed the bloody thing, he's not going to.
No, no, no. He loves Obscured by Clouds, I was going to say. He
Yeah.
thinks it's classic. But yeah, I remember when I discovered The Wall being absolutely shocked because, of course, I'd heard the psychedelic stuff, Dark Side and Wish You Were Here. Then suddenly this really bitter, caustic music. And I remember going into school and some Pink Floyd fans saying, "Oh, you missed Animals, didn't you?" I went, "Yeah." He goes, "It'll make sense once you've heard that." And it did, of course.
Yeah.
And subsequently, I've grown to love those albums, in particular Animals. But I really like The Wall as well, although, of course, is it a Pink Floyd album? Because I think Rick Wright and Nick Mason, if they're on it at all, they're on it as session players. It really is a Roger Waters concept with musical accompaniment by David Gilmour. And luckily, he does some of his most amazing solos on the likes of Cantabile Numb
Mm.
and it's got some wonderful pieces, Hey You. But yeah, this is where is it a band or not? You know, you could argue that as a band, they stop on Wish You Were Here because they all seem equal contributors to the sound. And although I think Animals is a band album because everyone plays on it and Richard Wright is still a prominent part, it seems as if that was heavily dictated by Waters' vision at that stage.
This is what I
Um,
find so surprising with Pink Floyd. Being not a huge fan and standing outside it objectively, there seems so much patchiness. There seems so much stuff that even if the album is quite good or it's very good, it still doesn't represent Pink Floyd. And you could start to go, well, you can't have that one. You know, that one's got,
yeah,
The Wall does drag. And when I heard it as a kid, I sort of lost interest because it dragged for me. You've actually nailed the thing about Animals because I've never really liked Animals, and everyone goes, "Oh, it's one of the most proggy ones. You'd love it, Andy." And what it is, it's hearing Roger Waters take over and really hammer his vision of the world at you. Whereas
yeah.
Dark Side of the Moon is much more existential and much more. It doesn't matter who you are, you're going to be able to. There is something a statement about life which is very profound with Dark Side of the Moon. Wish You Were Here is for me personally. There's all these personal things that you bring to it. When I was a kid, I had my best friend and we listened to music together. And I tend to towards the more hysteric Mavish Orchestra, Miles Davis, John Coltrane. And he was a big Camel fan. And he was a big Dire Straits fan. And he was a big Pink Floyd fan. So he would endlessly try and sell me Andy Latimer, Mark
Mhm.
Knopfler, and Dave Gilmour. Now they're all great guitarists. He was playing the guitar, and he loved these three guitarists. You see, so he would go take me over, and he would put on "Wish You Were Here," and I being young, would have to often take the opposite side. But one of the things he did do is he used to play me "Love Over Gold" over and over again. And so I associate that as the actual album that Pink Floyd never made. You know, you say that they stopped. They didn't. Because
Yeah,
side
yeah.
one of Love Over Gold, which is completely unlike most Dire Straits,
I
is
agree. Well, it's
like
the
the
only,
best Pink Floyd album you've ever heard.
the interesting thing with that is it's the only Dire Straits album I ever bought. And I remember at the time thinking, how have they gone from this admittedly brilliant elevated pub rock band with new wave tendencies to
Yeah,
Pink Floyd
yeah,
overnight?
totally is.
Telegraph Road and Private Investigations could be on a Pink Floyd album.
Oh,
And
totally. And actually, they
yeah,
show how Pink Floyd should have updated themselves. If they could have all worked together, because the thing with Dark Side of the Moon is all these elements, all of them coalesce in a magical Goldilocks, this is exactly right. And they're never there before. And I think because this film is so close to that, what I think I love about it is Pink Floyd, and you're seeing them play together, and there's a magic when they play together. They look incredible, and the idea of sticking them in Pompeii, which is so ancient and so mythical, they seem to exist in that place, and it takes them beyond the sort of hippie. If they just went to a concert and there's loads of girls there with long hair and round glasses and all that type of thing. So there's something incredible as a piece of art.
and the Pompeii, I think, as a backdrop, it serves to enhance the music and the band in the way that the Hypnosis covers often did as well. They were very lucky in that respect. They worked with some incredibly talented people. And you're right, I think that Goldilocks piece, I think, for me, the Goldilocks area for Pink Floyd probably is Echoes, Dark Side of the Moon, and I'd say Wish You Were Here as well. I think
Yeah, I'll take that from you. It's a brilliant album.
um, because what you've got is the contrast between the gruffness of Waters, because Waters is coming from a kind of Bob Dylan, Roy Harper, John Lennon singer-songwriter approach, and I think that you've got this kind of wonderful, almost profound observation from Roger Waters, and it's softened by the musicality of David Gilmour, Richard Wright, and their voices. So when you've got those three voices, I think that's where the balance comes in. And I think, we're underestimating as well, although I don't think he's technically the best drummer, I think Nick Mason is like Ringo Starr. He's essential to the sound of Pink Floyd. He's quite original in his approach. And personally, I think that he's quite a focal point in the film as well. They often concentrate on him.
And there's all these lucky mistakes where they didn't have coverage for which track is it, where it's basically they just show Nick Mason playing because they just didn't
Ah,
have the coverage. What's interesting is looking into this film is that the guys that wanted to make it had this idea. Pink Floyd, it was just in the diary. They didn't really want to do it that much. And they really delivered. And there was this decision to film it on 35mm and record it live and all this type of stuff. A lot of it went wrong. And when you see the dark shots with all the lights in the background, that's not at Pompeii. That's somewhere else.
uh, well, another thing was
It's
somebody sent me because I did a mini review of this on my Facebook page, and somebody said, "Oh, have you seen this?" And there's an hour and a bit documentary, French documentary of the making of the making in effect. And I'll send it to you. And I always thought it was beautifully sung and played. And you realize that they recorded a lot of the vocals in the studio. So
mm,
for me, it looks live. It's brilliantly framed. You think it's live. But one of the reasons why the tuning is so good is that they've re-recorded, the right Gilmore parts in the
mm.
studio.
I mean, it's at that time when the amount of technology needs to record a live album anyway, but to do a live film, it really was making a film, wasn't it? And when you see how many people went wrong doing that, I believe I haven't really seen the Yes film, the Yes songs. I
I
think it's sort,
have,
and
yeah.
it's just not good quality, is it? You for really, and then song remains the same, biggest band in
Musically,
the
it's
world.
really good, but visually, it's not good.
No, so many people never pulled it off, and Pink Floyd pulled it off. So, my argument here to you,
Mhm.
after bashing them so much, is that if we were to take the album Live at Pompeii as what it is, and the film, and put that all together into a package, where would you rank it? Because obviously we're going to put Dark Side of the Moon at number one. I don't think it's greater than that, really. But where would you
Yeah.
rank it after that?
Very well, it's a very good point. And I think that with the exception of Mademoiselle Knobs, which is funny, it's really consistently great.
Mm,
And maybe I'd rank it six or seven in my list of Pink Floyd albums. If it had been released at the time as a Pink Floyd live album, it would definitely be a favorite. I mean, I really like Ummagumma, but Ummagumma goes off the rails in ways I don't like in quite a few places. Um, so I don't know, maybe just behind Atom Heart Mother.
yeah. That's quite. I mean, that's relatively. I mean, I'd have it a much higher
Yeah.
than that. For me, I
I'd
would.
put it
I
above
would probably
more.
bring
I'd
it
put it
in.
above Obscured by Clouds.
Yeah. Um, yes, I think I might even put it in at number three behind
Okay.
Wish You Were Here. I'd probably
Right.
now I'd do Dark Side of the Moon. I'm not a huge fan of Wish You Were Here, but I can appreciate that it's pretty perfect in its conception and the way it's put across. It's an incredible album. It's just going towards what I call dad rock. I've never been a
Okay.
fan of dad rock, you see, and I maybe now I am even close to being a granddad. Maybe I should just drop that pretense that I don't like it really. Maybe I need to go buy a copy of it on CD and stick it in the car and go for a
Oh,
drive
I
in the
could bring up my
countryside.
phone. Well, I remember when I bought that and just seeing the package. Again, that was the other thing about them, Dark Side of the Moon with the posters, Wish You Were Here with the cellophane cover and the postcard. They always went that little extra bit further, I think. Yeah, I mean, going on Floyd, I think they ended in some ways in 77 perhaps, but 75 is the
Mm,
Goldilocks ended in 77 because I really like Final Cut and I really like The Wall. And actually I don't even mind the Division Bell where Rick Wright really comes back prominently. But for me, Momentary Lapse of Reason is a really good David Gilmour solo album in the Pink Floyd
mm,
style. Final Cut's a really good Roger Waters solo album in the Pink Floyd style. So it's again, it's what do you refer
mm.
to? You're doing those rankings. But as an album, I do like Final Cut and I do like Division Bell. Although it's
I,
over long.
I, I also think they are undone by a sort of meticulousness, which on Dark Side of the Moon, with the technology they had, was delivered brilliantly
Yeah.
because the technology was holding them back, so they had to work in a certain way. But by the time they get to the wall and you read how long it was made and what was involved, I mean, the story of hiring Lee Ritner, perhaps the biggest session guitarist at that time, to turn up and do guitar solos so that then they could piece one together that Dave Gilmour would learn note for note because he was out of ideas. And that whole story that about when Lee Ritner arrives, he said he walks into this biggest room you've ever seen, and there's Gilmour sat there with 100 amps, and they're trying every single amp out and every single mic combination, and he's got no ideas whatsoever because it's all become so precious. And they're probably also trying to fight for their own space. So he's in there on his own, and then, you got Roger Waters, and I feel that when I listen to it. And then as a kid, all my friends were waiting in 1983 for the final cut to come out, and then it got announced, and it was called the final cut. So, oh my God, this is going to be last. We didn't realise that's not what it means, but it's going to be the last Pink Floyd album. It's hyped so much, and I can remember going and buying that and putting it on. And the sense of anticlimax in that room amongst these Pink Floyd fans. So I have for me, they're a really strange band. For a band that is elevated so high up,
Yeah.
it's like if you take like Jethro Tull. Jethro Tull do not make a bad album from '68 all the way up to 1980. There's no bad albums. They're incredibly
I'll go for
consistent.
84 on that, but go on. Yeah, I'm
Which,
with you.
which which ones would you not say?
I, no, I like Under Wraps. I'm saying
Oh,
I'd
you
go
go
up
even further.
four.
Yes,
I'd
yes.
go further.
But I don't know. So you got poor old Jethro Tull, another
Yeah.
stadium filling band. It's like what you say, a stadium filling band on FM radio all the time. Albums going in at number one. Incredibly difficult music, and yet it's selling in the millions. And they just deliver album after album after album after album. But here we are, 40 years later, and Jethro Tull are bringing albums out now. No one. It's not like if there was a Pink Floyd album coming out.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting that Pink Floyd have been able to be able to keep themselves going, a little bit like Queen. But there's a machine by
Yeah.
Queen that keeps them going. I wonder what it is with Pink Floyd.
I think partly it's the imagery. I think it's everything surrounding it. I think that the hypnosis artwork is significant and should never be underestimated in the same way that I think Peter Saville's artwork for Joy Division. Why are Joy Division often seen way above the post-punk peers? Because yes, they were one of the best post-punk bands and they're great records. But actually, there's some bloody good records by other bands as well from that period. But I think artwork can feed into it. And maybe with Floyd, one of the weirdest things is they hate each other. It's really apparent. And there have been some really uncomfortable, ugly political
Mm,
debates on all
yeah.
sides. And it doesn't seem to in any way puncture the myth.
No.
And they're one of the weirdest bands in this that if you do biographies of, say, yes, Jethro Tull, and I know they've all carried on, but most of those biographies almost kind of finish in the late 70s, early 80s, with
Yeah.
generally not very
Yeah.
much almost like they've just done a few tours after that. Pink Floyd, you could have two books just on the art, the X or Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, as they always say,
Mm.
arguments between Gilmour and Waters. There's still a story
And,
ongoing.
and it was only a year or so ago that the biggest news in, say, the prog world and sort of in the music world was while Roger Waters was making the headlines and being on Piers Morgan and all that, at the same time that's going out, he brought his own version out of Dark Side of the Moon,
Yeah,
which people bought, and there was a huge tour that went with it, and then they got banned, and all this stuff's going on still,
yeah.
by a guy that's in his 80s, and the album's terrible.
I,
Absolutely terrible,
I wouldn't disagree with you on that. I did buy it and end up giving it away. Yeah, I mean, well, the Live 8 was a lovely. I don't think you saw the Live 8 appearance. That was where it was the last
I
time they
watched it
had
on TV, yeah. But
classic full piece. And there was something very special there, though. I remember watching it and thinking, this is really moving. And they have captured that Pink Floyd spirit. But there's a bit towards the end where Waters is clearly thinking, this is amazing. And he's looking at the others. And it's like, surely, can we do this again? And there's a look in Gilmour's eyes. And it's like, I will never, ever get on a stage with you again, you utter bastard. There's a kind of a look in his eyes. And I think he said afterwards that everything that, he did it because he knew it was for a good cause and they should do it, and he did it to the best of their ability. But everything in the rehearsal room apparently emphasized all of the divisions that had occurred.
Mm.
And it might be really difficult for somebody like Nick Mason who gets on with all of them.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
I understand this to an extent. I mean, I'm not going to say who, but there's a band that I have well, a couple of bands actually that I have dealings with, and I get on with all sides of that. And I just can't see it, but they will not talk. And so you're talking to them individually, and they're decent, intelligent, interesting people, but they cannot in any way talk to this other person. And you can't see it. But yeah, so Gilmore and Waters, it seemed that whatever tensions were between them were exacerbated by the rehearsals for Live 8 because yeah, I'd have loved to have seen them get together in their 60s to make another album because Gilmore's voice was still amazing at that point, as was his guitar playing. And actually, although I've not been enamored of all the Roger Waters solo albums, things like Amused to Death, wonderful album. He was still writing to a very high standard, and it would have been so interesting for them to have just buried all of the divisions and said, right, we're going to make something together as a band, especially while Rick Wright was still alive, because, I do think he's an underrated part of the band as well as Mason. Think of Echoes, and you think of that one note. Is it going through the Binson? It's an electric piano going through or a Leslie
The
speaker or
Leslie, I
something.
think, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can't stop talking about them now, and as we say, I think there's an emptiness in there that you fill, and I
Yeah.
think that emptiness is an aesthetic emptiness. It's the same thing Joy Division has got. There's a mystery, isn't there? And it
Yeah.
is in the album. It's in the subject matter. It's because as kids you would look at the cover of Wish You Were Here, and go, what the hell's this mean? And then
Yeah.
you get to the next album, what's going on here? So you're trying that there was always, I mean, as a kid, you got to remember when we were listening to them as kids, we didn't really know what they looked like, did we? We didn't really know who they were. It was just Pink Floyd, and there was these blokes that were sort of hidden, a little bit like Kraftwerk, you just don't really know who they are. Now, of course, their personalities have come out. So, but yeah, I think there is an enigma around them, you're right. And so that makes them compelling. And that might have been what's been able to power through, for me, is like quite a patchy career, really. I mean, with 40 years of people who have gone from the age 40, to me, they have never done anything that's equal. I mean, there's no like 90125, there's no like
No, not
Genesis
at all.
coming out and
No.
becoming the biggest pop band in the world. There's nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I was still a teenager when they released Final Cut, and I wasn't disappointed, partly because I knew Leonard Cohen at that stage, so I loved Leonard Cohen's work. So I could sort of hear where
Mm.
Waters was coming from to a degree. The one that disappointed me at the time was Momentary Lapse of Reason, because I remember Waters said, this is a great forgery of Pink Floyd. And I think he's right in a way. I think it's David Gilmour making a solo album into a Pink Floyd album, using people like Phil Manzanera on it as co-writers, Tony Levin on bass. And I think he's actually done a good job. I think at the time I was disappointed because it didn't seem to have the depth of Pink Floyd. And to a degree, I still don't think that Momentary Lapse of Reason even, equals Final Cut in terms of emotional quality. But as the years have gone on, when I listen to it, I think, you know what? You did a really good job of making a Pink Floyd album, if that
Mm.
makes any sense. It's not really a Pink
But
Floyd.
all of this stuff for me is nowhere near Dark Side of the Moon. It's nowhere near Echoes. It's
Yeah,
nowhere near Atom Heart Mother. I mean, if I just pick the one of the greatest albums ever made, Dark Side of the Moon, when you put that on, nothing that they did afterwards, like even on the Wall for me, has that quality of like you've found this realm and you open the doors and you walk in and it's like 2001 when he's landing on
yeah,
that moon. It's got that quality about it that you feel it's such a trip. It's such a journey through this. And I can remember as being a very young kid listening to it and getting this idea of a midlife crisis, which of course they weren't in at the time.
Yeah,
And contemplating, the immortality. It's a little bit like Toy Story in its themes, but it's like the dark inverse of Toy Story. That theme is very strong for
yeah,
me, incredibly strong, and I felt it as a kid.
yeah,
What's the point in life? One minute you're playing football with your mates, now you got a mortgage. It's all that. I thought that was really well done, and then branching out into all these sort of metaphysical. They never did it again. They never seemed to get to that again.
No, although they always had a sophistication. And the thing is, if you think of the lyrics to The Wall and the way in which it talks about indoctrination at school or divorce, they always had a kind of a quality, and you've kind of adulthood. It's like I always remember as well listening to Rumours when I was a kid and thinking that they knew life in a way I didn't. There's something in Rumours even. And again, they had enigmatic covers that were
Yeah.
great. And I suppose because I was very much the kid of sort of a broken family that was continually breaking, and then there was death. For me, it resonated really strongly, actually. I think you're right.
There's a Tim Bowness quote there for you. And then there was death. If he'd have been in Genesis when Steve Hackett left, it wouldn't have been
Oh
and
my
then
God.
there were three. It would have been and then there was death.
And then there was death. But I always think it's interesting with Genesis that they always say, and they might be right. I think it's Tony Banks said it, that they never made a Dark Side of the Moon, and they knew it, that
Yeah,
they'd
they
never
never
made
did.
a defining album.
No, no, they
So
never did. They never did. Supper's ready. Side two of Foxtrot, without a doubt. If you just had that, Lamb Lies Down is close to it.
mm,
Yes, did close to the edge. They did.
yeah,
Dark Side of the Moon, and I have to say though those three Oldfield albums, all of them hit really hard in terms of that period of time.
first three.
Yeah, the first three. I mean, what I think that as I've got older, I've started to realize Tubular Bells is another album that occupies that space in that time, and
Yeah.
it just gets the zeitgeist right. And then Oldfield, I think, really does do some incredible stuff. He can't live up to that. But I've been revisiting Omadorn a lot recently and going, well, this is just incredible. It's pure music. It's a different thing, but it's definitely it delivers that. All those prog bands, that it's that period, 73, where it's like a late summer and everything's got so lush and everybody's trying to make their grand statement. And Pink Floyd did it, and I think that they were the ones who probably did it more than anybody else. Have you ever
Yeah,
met
and all
anybody
those
out of Pink?
albums. Pardon?
Have you ever met any of them?
Floyd, I've not. The closest I've got is Steve O'Rourke, who's kind of referred to in the Abbey Road sections as the person who doesn't like a mix. Do you remember? I think it's Roger Waters is saying, but Steve O'Rourke, he doesn't know how to use a musical instrument, doesn't know how to use this, and he's being a bit patronizing about him. And he came to a couple of No Man gigs when we were first starting. Ben, our violinist, knew a lot of people, and he knew Nigel Kennedy. And one of the first breaks we ever had, and this is kind of fascinating in a way, is that Nigel Kennedy came to a couple of our rehearsals. So did David Cross of King Crimson, and they were very, very nice people. And Kennedy went on a Radio 1 um, program, I think it was an award ceremony, before we were ever signed with a No Man t-shirt. And people noticed that, sort of, oh, what's this t-shirt? Which was interesting. It got people talking, and he invited us to see the Four Seasons. Um, and Steve O'Rourke, and I don't know, I think it was through Ben. If I remember correctly, I think Ben was going out with the person who would kit Pink Floyd out on their tour. They actually had somebody who dressed them, because obviously David Gilmour couldn't select his underpants. So he needed the underpants and the socks coordinated. And so we went to a few parties where lots of people on the edge of the Pink Floyd universe were, including Steve O'Rourke. And say he saw us live a couple of times and he was quite interested in managing us. And I don't know why it didn't happen, but obviously we were really excited by that. And yeah, even having, being on the edge of that world, there was a glamour to it. Um, and I think Nick led Clowes, who was Dream Academy, he'd co-written a few pieces with David Gilmour that eventually got used on Pink Floyd albums. So, and Ben again worked with him. So yeah, that was as kind of close as it got. Steve O'Rourke coming
You'll,
from
you'll be impressed with this then. Wait, wait there. I realise this. Things are always at hand.
I have done, sorry, yeah. No, because I supported Sourceful of Secrets in Germany. And so I did meet Nick Mason and have a long chat with him. What was I saying? I say I had a long chat with him. This is true, but the rest of the band, Sourceful, they are so affable, lovely. And Gary Kemp came up to me before the gig and he said, "Oh, Tim, I love your Flowers at the Scene album." And I thought, fantastic. So he said, "Come backstage, meet the guy." And they were lovely. And then Nick was sitting on a sofa. And it's almost like looking like I don't need to talk to anybody for the rest of my life. Nothing is of interest. And they were saying, Nick, Tim, he's playing just before us at the festival. Little nod of the head. And then suddenly Gary Campbell said, he lives in Bradford Avon. And suddenly it's like stone came to life. He went, "Oh, Bradford Avon." Myself and my wife, because he's got a house in nearby
Yeah,
Corsham.
yeah.
Myself and my wife, we often go for a walk in this area. And I said, "Oh, that's exactly where I live." Really?
But
And then
Bradford David
suddenly,
is is Progton, isn't it?
it
Not
is
Trumpton, it's Progton.
Cogton Central. It is true.
Yeah.
You
There's
know,
also
the national anthem is a plague of lighthouse keepers. This is what is played. Ba, ba, da, ba, 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 da, ba, ba, ba. Exactly. And Peter Hamill did live round the corner. Michael Giles, King Crimson drummer, just lives up the road, although it's not quite Brad, it must be said. Who else? John Taylor of Duran Duran, Progton.
Secret Progger.
Well, it is probably secret
I've got
Progton.
this. Oh, I won't there. I'll have to bloody put it in front of me. I've got this snare drum here, and I've got it signed, and
Yeah.
I do believe one of the signatures on it, because it is if I can find it, there. I've got my thumb by there. That is Nick Mason's signature. So
Lovely.
I was at a drum festival trying to get this signed by various people. And Nick Mason wasn't playing at the drums festival. He was just a punter. He'd just gone to have a look around the drums. So I'm actually holding this, saying to my mate, "Is there anyone else we could get to sign this?" And my mate said, "How about Nick Mason?" I said, "Yeah, but he's not here." And he goes, "We're standing behind you." And I looked behind, and he was literally watching over, looking at this drum. And I had
Yeah.
exactly the same thing. I said, "Oh, Mr. Mason, would you be up for signing this drum?" And he went, I said, "Would you like a pen?" He went, signed
Right.
it. I went, "Thank you very much, Mr. Mason." He went, he never said a word. And then he floated off like this.
What I think it is that it's protecting. I think he's probably a really decent person, and it's protecting himself because Pink Floyd, probably more than most bands, have hangers-on, obsessive stalkers, and I've seen it before in some other people who've done this, and where he changed, another person he was really nice to, Steve Hillage, came backstage, and suddenly he was totally normal, totally friendly because he produced Steve in the 70s, and he knows there's no
Jamal as well.
this is a pal. And I had a friend who did some racing car stuff. I don't know what they're called. What are they? They're called cars and they race, aren't they? And
Yeah, I
apparently,
think they're called racing cars. Formula One, I don't know what he's into
yeah,
either.
it wasn't Formula One. It was something like, I don't know, Formula Four, if that exists. I don't know
Yeah,
whether it exists. I'm just
yeah.
putting that out there. Anyway, he was doing these races, and Nick Mason was one of the drivers. And this would have been in the mid 80s probably, and I remember my friend saying, "Oh, he's lovely, yeah, he talks to you," and I wonder if because he's doing what he loves there with the racing cars, and nobody's there for Pink Floyd, they're there for the racing cars, so they're not going to bother him with Dark Side of the Moon. It means the world to me, man. He's not going to be bothered, so he's really normal, really nice. And I guess maybe you get bored if you've had 50 years of people saying, "This is my life." Yeah,
I
it's
think it's
protecting yourself.
because of all when if you were to rank them in poshiness, I think Nick
Yeah,
Mason is at the top. He's the most poshest. I think he's got a castle. I imagine he's probably got a small feudal kingdom in Corsham with people, moving mud around for him on his property, and he goes walking around, and you get that scene from Monty Python and Narco Syndicalism, and that's how I imagine him. I'm being a bit facetious here, and I
No,
also think that the racing car thing, he is actually from racing stock, isn't it? Wasn't one of
but
his? Yeah, I think it's not just he's interested in it. I think part that he's from a quite a high class family, quite a wealthy family, and I often go into racing, and I think his dad or his granddad or somebody, I really badly researched, but in the back of my mind, I think that's part of his upbringing. He has come, I was reading about the trad jazz movement. It's very much like early 70s prog. People that are sort of minor lords that don't need to work, so they go and get drunk and do trad jazz, make friends with George Melly, and then Bob's your uncle. This I was reading about, and I think it's the same with him. So it might be that he's just got quite an aristocratic approach to life, where he just goes with the flow and doesn't feel like he needs to, ingratiate himself with people because he is basically top of the pecking order.
look, the housing caution was not two up, two down. I'll let you know that. And actually, it was owned by Queen Camilla, which actually totally buys into your. And it is. It's enormous. It's
Yeah.
absolutely lots of grounds. And he does put on a nice event for charity. And the last time I was there, he had a lovely classic car exhibition, and also a local brass band that he got covering Pink Floyd. So it was really interesting hearing the Pink Floyd tunes played by a local brass band.
I
Yeah.
wonder how much that cost.
I wonder, but of course, this is the thing. It is enormous, and the grounds are enormous, and it's not his only house.
No.
So you might be right. I would go. See, I always thought in interview, but you may be right. David Gilmour, Nick Mason, kind of equal level of poshness. Then Rick Wright, then Roger Waters. Because I think Roger Waters, Sid Barrett, they went to grammar schools.
Yeah, they're more middle class. It's like
They
with
were not
Genesis, Mike
public.
Rutherford's at the top.
I've
And
met
his
him.
background is like not. I think it's the army or the navy. It's also military. I
Yeah.
mean, when you look them up, all their grandfathers and grandmothers, they've also got Wikipedia entries. It's really, I find this fascinating, and I
I've met a
think
few. Yeah, sorry, I was going to say I met a few
no,
Genesis.
Rutherford's the poshest out of.
He was really posh. I remember because we were signed to Hit and Run Publishing, which was owned by Genesis, and they had a Christmas party, and Mike Rutherford came around, and it was almost like, this is Tim. He's in our band No Man, because I think we were signed along with Cooler Shaker and Right Said Fred and Space as Hit and Run, trying to get the new trendy.
Yeah.
But he was lovely. He was lovely, but it was a bit like meeting Prince Charles, where it's like, this is Tim. He's a part of this band we signed. Like, and he was very nice, and he did us go, so how long have you been writing? He was very, very nice. And I do remember them meeting them backstage because as a hit and run artist, you got invited free to Genesis concerts. And I went with Richard Barbieri. And we went, I don't know whether he lasted that long, but we went backstage. And again,
Oh, hello,
it
Richard Barbieri. Hello. You
was
said he
Barbieri.
watches my channel, Richard Barbieri, legendary Richard
Okay.
Barbieri. He loves
You're,
the channel. You're all right, Richard. How you doing, mate?
he's,
Really
you
appreciate
are
that.
his favorite personality at the moment.
Really?
He
God,
loves
I
you.
mean it. Of all the people, I would never thought it would have been him. I would have thought Mick Khan would have been a fan of my channel, but
Oh, my
sadly he's no longer here because he seemed to be the naughty one in Japan. I would have thought.
well observed. He certainly was. Yeah.
Yes.
Richard is the one I think myself and Stephen connected with immediately because Richard, I think, um, very, very thoughtful and quite musical, obsessive. And yes, we could say, and then there was death, and he'd understand. So he'd be with us straight away.
And we've got to
Um,
do this often because the thing is, we always go off on tangents, and you've had such an illustrious career in music, and all these legends, you've had all these wonderful interactions, and you're very colourful in describing these stories. And I think it's good to bring these people to life. I mean, I think people like Richard Barbier, Japan. I mean, 40 years ago, I was looking at the back of that, whatever album it is. It's not quite life. Which one is it? The one with
drum?
yeah, Tin Drum, and looking at them sat in that thing, and they all look so cool. And I used to look at Steve Johnson and think, oh my God, that's the coolest drummer in the world. There's nobody cooler than that.
I mean, he is. The thing is, Steve is as cool as you think he is.
That's what I want to know, you see.
Richard is as serious as you think he is. And
Yeah.
you're right, Mick was very much the clown of the group. This is somebody who musically was stunning. He was incredible to be on a stage with and played brilliantly. But as a character, although on one level he was a creator of serious sculptures, this was a man who'd also be driving through the streets in an expensive Jaguar, almost doing Sid the Sexist, Sid James whistles. There was a different character that I was surprised by. I mean, very, very humorous, very nice, very approachable.
So you reckon you could get a carry-on film out of the story of Japan? Is it worth
I
going to the
think you
producer and
could. I think you could carry on whatever, tinning that drum. I'm not quite sure what it would be, but
that would
there's
be
a
brilliant.
possible story there.
Yes, I think we've got to the back end of this, but I think what we could say is that both of us, me knowing the old, and I've listened to the album. Obviously, I've listened to the remake, incredible, love it, and they've extended some of the tracks. It's all brilliant. We haven't talked about it that much, but the point is, we haven't got a bad thing to say about this album, have we? Even me, who likes to bash Pink Floyd because I know that the fans get so upset by it, but even me, brilliant, one of the greatest,
The thing
great
is,
albums.
the one moment that, if you like, is throwaway is that Mademoiselle Nobbs where they get the dog to howl. But when you're in the cinema, it's hilarious. And again, they've done just the right thing because you've got this atmospheric film, this beautiful, spacious music, and then suddenly this joke blues with a dog
Oh,
singing
yeah.
and someone playing harmonica. And it's just the right moment of comic relief. In the film, everybody, and I went to see it in Bath Cinema, and I'd say it was two-thirds, mine was probably the third showing, two-thirds full. And what was again interesting is that I would say a good third were 22 and younger, a lot of students there.
Wow. Oh, you've got to give it to them. You've got to give it to them. I think a force of nature, really, Pink Floyd. Even though they've
Yeah.
had patchy albums, and even though Dire Straits managed to outdo them in their later years, I'm glad you agree about that. I thought that was a
Well,
really contentious viewpoint I was going to throw in there.
no, I think you're right. Although I do think that if you wanted that to be the ultimate masterpiece, get Gilmour to sing some harmonies and counter to Knopfler. Because Knopfler could have been a great Roger Waters substitute. You're totally right.
He could have, couldn't he?
Yeah.
Why don't we try and get Gilmour and Waters to make friends? I think they need some intermediary. Maybe Trump could do it because he's not doing very well with Ukraine, is he? That he hasn't been able to get world peace there, and he's let everybody down. He promised he'd do it in a day. Well, if he
Yeah.
can't do that, how about Waters and Gilmour? You could go in there,
But we've
get
got
them around the table.
we've
You know
tried.
what he'll do straight off? It'll be, oh, it's all Gilmour's fault.
Then it's all Waters' fault. No, I know what you mean. Obviously, we've got Ukraine, Russia, India,
Yeah.
Pakistan, Gaza, Israel, and Waters, Gilmour. And yeah,
Surely Trump can
and-
sort it all out in
and-
one go.
yeah,
And then what we do, once we've got them back together and they're friends, we take them down, get the multi-tracks of Love Over Gold, and then we redo it as a Pink Floyd album, and you and me can produce it. Do you know how
yeah.
massive that would be?
Well, actually, do you know what? We could do that now ourselves. So if we did now decide, let's
Oh, with
redo,
AI.
let's redo Love Over Gold. We'll get somebody to do that, and we'll do some beautiful, lush harmonies with it. Love Over Gold, specifically redone as a Pink Floyd album, covered by you, me, some extra. Maybe Kev can do the guitars. He's brilliant, isn't
I'll
he?
get my mate friend Kevin Gammon to do that. I
He's
will do
amazing.
that. Although
So,
I did upset him. I mean, he's not been well, Kevin. I saw him. I saw him yesterday, but I was dressed as Brummy Dave, so I was doing the Brummy Dave video, which means I've let it out the cat out of the bag because it's me dressed up. But I've let the cat out of the bag, Tim. So I'm sat there with my wig on. I've got the dark satin black sunglasses. I've got my bandana on, denim jacket over a leather jacket, and I'm sat there going, "The next thing you want," and doing all this. And then Kev just opens the door, and I went, "Bloody hell, is Kevin Gabbard a Birmingham legend like this?" Because he just looked at me like, "What the hell are you doing?" And he just sort of reversed his way back out and went. So he gets mentioned a lot on this channel, Kevin Gabbard does. And I need to get you together with Kevin because I think that would be a good thing to do. We need to do a lot more.
I tell you, I
And
know a journalist here. He's a counselor, music journalist, has worked with a lot of people. And it turns out he was brought up in Kidderminster and then said, "Oh, I don't know if you know Kevin Gammond. He's one of the most amazing players." So this was totally separate from you. And just said, "Yeah, this guy is somebody everybody should know about."
oh, he should. Yes, he should. I mean, it's yeah, it'll all come together at some point, Tim, because we're talking about it. But we have now devolved. This is just like we've got a gig and we're backstage waiting to go on, and you and me are having our usual freewheeling conversation.
But
It's
we've got it
slightly
on
surreal,
record.
but full of very lots of information.
Yeah. The Edwards bonus Pink Floyd remake of Love Over Gold. Remember it. Make it so, Captain.
Well, Mr. Stephen Wilson, he likes Love Over Gold.
He loves
Doesn't
it.
he? He loves it as well, so maybe he could come in and do some work on it. Because once you got his name on it, you're home and dry, aren't you? He's
Yeah.
going to do that. But I've just got to get Knopfler involved. He's easy go. It's a good plan. This is. I really want to at least bring Love Over Gold into the Pink Floyd canon. I would love to have it ranked and for people to say, yeah, it sort of gets brought in on the side. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I would
Well,
love
even
that to happen.
it will, the point is, no matter what happens, it will sell because you're talking about the enduring legacy of Pink Floyd. One of the things that's interesting, and I know this with my Burning Shed hat on, is that if we issue, there are a few, they're very dodgy, but they're legal, and they're in effect bootlegs of Pink Floyd radio recordings from the late 60s, early 70s. A few labels have managed to get hold of them because they're radio recordings, they exist in the public domain. Pink Floyd don't own them and they've been issuing them. And of course, they're not beautifully remastered, they're not beautifully presented, but they do capture, let's say, a Peel session or a radio show from 69 that we at
Yeah.
Burning Shell do phenomenally well with them. So even, something that's kind of on the edge of the Pink Floyd universe, it's not official. It's not even particularly well presented, but they do phenomenally well. There is something about people buying into this mystique or trying to get a handle. And I remember there were reggae versions of Pink Floyd pieces for a while, and
Yeah,
they,
Dumb Side of the Moon and all that stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, right, Dub Side of the Moon.
Yeah, I think I got that actually. Even I bought that. Because I think the next thing that's going to happen, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet, is anybody now can grab one of those radio broadcasts or buy it from your company, Burning Shed, stick it into a computer, and then they can divide all those into separate tracks. The AI won't just separate them; it will fill in the gaps, and then the AI will buff those up. You can basically say, now that bass line, now separate it, make it sound like Roger Waters, and make it sound pristine. And at
Yeah.
some point, this is going to tip over because there's a possibility to bring these radio recordings up to sound as great as
I've got another
this.
album
Yeah.
for us. I've got another album for us. Atom Heart Dubber. We can do that.
What about Atom Heart Mothers of Invention, where we mix Frank Zappa and
Oh,
Pink Floyd together?
that'd be glorious. I bet they played on the same bill a few times as well. That's one of the things I love when you look at 70s posters and bills where you see, let's say Van de Graaff Generator did play with David Gates' Bread. I mean, I'm inventing that one, but you look and you think, how did this happen? But it did.
How about we could do redo more, but we call it Roger Moore, and we make it all about sex, but narrated by Roger Moore.
I'm liking this. Yeah.
What about Piper, Piper at the Gates of Tony, Orlando, and Dawn?
You're stretching it, but I'm still liking it. And I think there's enough mileage in it. Obviously, I do like, the Roger Moore idea. I can hear this already. Get AI
Yeah.
having improbable Roger Moore sentences. I wish I could do a better
Wish you
impression.
were here, but Judith Chalmers singing all the parts.
Well, I think
Shall I stop?
it's the untapped potential of AI, really, isn't it?
Yes, I know. All they're doing is say, "Oh, Pink Floyd, if they were in the 1950s, that's boring."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've got a lot of ideas there. Hopefully, people will pick up on this. I think we should stop here because this is absolute nonsense. But they'll be watching it. They'll be loving it. So, would you want to all say goodbye to Tim? He's coming. Here, he looks great. He's got nice camera. He's good quality. He's got all those little things in the background. He's positioned really good. There's all
They're my
things to look
sons.
at.
They're the Funko Pops. They're my sons. They're my books.
Brilliant. And you've got lots of cars there. It's all looking great. So, shall we say goodbye to them all, team? And I'll get my finger on the button.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye, everybody. Bye bye. You're going to say bye from Prompton.
Goodbye
Bye
from
bye.
Turkey.